Welcome to the Shipping Podcast, where I meet interesting maritime professionals sharing their passion for the shipping industry and their everyday job. I am your host. My name is Lena Gothberg. Hello, Shipping Podcast listeners. Welcome to the 79th episode of the Shipping Podcast, where I am going to introduce you to Patrik Berglund, the CEO of Xeneta, one of the hottest startup companies in the Nordics. Xeneta is an ocean freight rate benchmarking platform and was the Norwegian Startup of the Year in 2016. I met Patrik in the offices of Xeneta in the middle of Oslo on 25th of October last year. And I'm so happy that we are finally here, that I can release this episode and you can listen to Patrik Berglund. So, without further ado, this is Patrik Berglund for you.
So I'm Patrik Berglund, CEO of Xeneta.
And what is your background?
I used to be a freight forwarder back in the days, working for Co-Funder, doing the basic stuff, nuts and bolts of the industry, moving cargo from A to Z, helping out customers, buying from carriers and selling that capacity basically to our customers.
And before that, what is your...
Well, then I went to school. I went to business school and I did a bachelor degree with a specialization within logistics management. But I actually started on my master's degree as well, but then I got this job opportunity from Co-Funder, which suited me well. I think I'm a little bit restless to go to school. So the timing was perfect. I could jump off that master's degree after half a year and started working for Co-Funder, which was very vibrant and dynamic and suited me very well. So did the basic stuff there for a couple of years.
Why did you choose logistics and shipping and how did that come about?
Yeah, I wish I had a great story for you, but the honest truth is that I walked past a billboard that said part-time job in 123, and I was looking for a part-time job next to my studies, and I tossed in an application in the afternoon, and I got a reply the same day that a company wanted to meet me the following day. I met them that day, and I got a job offer later the same day. So that's how it's very random. But I think I was attracted by the whole international aspect of the industry to begin with. That's what really the first thing I can remember that caught my curiosity. And then just the opportunities within the company seemed endless. I think at that point in time we were like 80 people in Co-Funder in Norway, but the company had 60,000 plus globally. And by the time I left Co-Funder in Norway, there were 500 people. So it was always growing, and it was such a fun ride to be a part of. And again, the opportunities they gave you as well was really great. So I joined various training programs. My role kept changing either every 6 or 12 months. So it was a constant development. And training, I think we learned a lot, both me and my co-founder, from the years in KN, and especially this whole lack of transparency, this being a volatile market on the shipping side. Co-Funder is big on containerized shipping, being the market leading freight forwarder. So it was a brilliant place to go and learn the basics of what we needed for Xeneta.
So when did you leave Co-Funder?
When was it? We stayed with KN until 2010, I think. And then at the last 2 years within KN, we worked for Lead Logistics. So that's like a 4PL part of Co-Funder, which was the most fascinating thing I've done up until then in my career, because all of a sudden you were selling freight, but you were trying to design the optimal setups for the customers. So it was a very different approach. So we set up these control towers. We worked with customers that had logistics providers such as DHL or Schenker or Maersk Line or whichever company that was really the right partner for them, rather than focusing on selling freight through our own forwarding company. So that was beautiful because it allowed us to take a very different stance, one that had the same incentives and goals as our customer, which is really what I found to be not a problem, but a conflicting thing when I started as a forwarder is that you bought something from someone and then you sold it off more expensively, right? Now, when you think about ocean freight in this business model, what happens is that if the market is on a high level, you in the middle will earn more as long as you add the same percentage. While if the market is low, you will earn less adding the same percentage. And the customer will then always hope that the market is low, and I will hope that the market is high. So this not aligned desire of how where the market should be is something that conflicted me, because I thought I was doing a good job whether the market was high or low. I simply earned less money if it was low and more money if it was high, so I couldn't really influence the output and the results of my job. It was a condition of the market. And that's actually the first time me and my co-founder started to look into indices for this industry, because I consider a container to be a commodity. It's a 20-foot, 40-foot high cube, reefer box. They all look and feel the same. And when I think about other commodities such as oil, grain, silver, gold, whatever you can think of, soybeans, they all have indices. They're all volatile markets that has transparency. Yet our industry, which is somewhere around $200 billion a year, has no industry. It's a massive market with this lack of transparency. And I know this is being debated back and forth. People have different opinions about it. But if you really think about that there's a long and a short-term market in this industry, and companies are moving goods from Santos in Brazil to Mombasa or Yokohama to Newark, there's no, from my point of view, there's not a sufficient degree of transparency for them to efficiently operate in that market. So we actually saw that working for the lead logistics part of Kühnenagel, and once we left Kühnenagel, that was parts of what we wanted to solve and provide a value proposition to the customers on. And I guess that's kind of where our story starts. So we originally tried to go to the supplier side, that being the forwarders and the carriers, and ask them whether they could provide us with their pricing data. And I think I was maybe too naive at that time, but it's obvious that if I'm selling you coffee cups and you have no idea what coffee cups should cost, I will charge you 20 instead of the 10, which would be, let's say, cost plus 10%, right? Or 20%. So why would I, as a supplier of coffee cups, want to provide visibility on prices? So that was like the first epiphany, that the only stakeholder that has an incentive to make this market transparent would be the shipper, the BCO, right? And the problem we were then facing is that we would need enough shippers to give us their pricing data, to have enough data to aggregate it so that this is the average, this is the spread of the market, and the data needs to come in a frequent manner so that this spread of the market would move inside our indices in the system. And that was really, I'm not sure whether people are aware, but that hurdle is massive, because all this data expires at some point. So if I got a company, let's say, importing cargo into Europe from Mexico, and they have had a quarterly rate, I would need to find other companies moving cargo on the same routes within that quarter. Otherwise, they would see no value from the platform. And then if you find someone moving from Mexico to Mediterranean, it doesn't match, right? So it was horrible. It felt like a hamster wheel, and we were just running and running. So the 2.5 first years, we received about 2 million prices. And then that was like our inflection point, because of the two next years, those 2 million grew to, I think it's 39 million or something today. So it really took off, and we're tracking our data growth, of course, and we have this hockey stick chart. And I think it's the only real hockey stick chart that we have, which of course investors love. But really the value of our company, the only reason why it has any value is because of that data. The fact that that data has become so rich and so wide in terms of covering all these strange port-to-port combinations is why companies can use and trust the data to represent the market on the different trades they have. Yeah, long story, but
no, but I love it. But they gave you the prices.
Yeah, well,
reluctantly, or
yeah. In the beginning, it's going back to the hamster wheel. If you think about this data as being proprietary data sets, which it is, right? Then it gets even more difficult. And really what you got to find is the people that see the same pain point as you do. And people who have been buying ocean freight, containerized ocean freight, enough times usually do. Usually they relate to the challenge of the market moving up by 130%. I mean, look at this from a guy who's responsible, or a gal who's responsible for logistic purchasing in a large company, and they get presented by the beginning of the year, the management would say we need to cut our logistics costs by 5%. So imagine going half a year into that year and the market goes up with 100+%. You can't base, or you can't even think that you will get a saving. If the market used to be down here and it moves up here, you can talk about 5% saving as much as you want on this market when it was low. When it's high, it's no chance. There's absolutely no possibility. So what we essentially provide is it's not only data to help them buy, but also transparency in the market so that they can have internal, sensible conversations with their management. I think it surprised me as one of the most valuable use cases of our data. Because if you had a spend last year of 30 million and it suddenly moves to 40 million, then you've got to be able to justify that. Otherwise, it looks like you haven't done your job. And we have plenty of use cases now, especially going from mid-16 when everything started to move upwards again, or trend upwards in the different corridors around the world. We have several use cases where companies have improved their position in the market. So let's say they move from $30 million spend to 40 million. But relative to the market, their position is improved. That means that the company is more competitive. So they should actually be applauded rather than slaughtered for having this cost increase. So, yeah, I guess that's...
So the drive comes more from the ones buying?
That's what it's always been. We built this originally for the buyers, right? Putting ourselves in their shoes and seeing what kind of pain we solve. The funny thing is, and this is where I think we have a massive benefit now, because we have a really strong user base of Fortune 500 companies, global corporations, right? Now, our hypothesis was always that demand decides where supply needs to move, right? So whatever the customer says, and I know this from my days in KN or my own companies, that whatever the customer tells you to do at a certain point or to a certain degree, you will obey because they're paying your bills, right? So we had this situation where a lot of the big value, big volume shippers would start to take this data and present it to the suppliers, the carriers, the forwarders. And they would say, I can't accept that price because I used to be, let's say, market average minus 10%, and all of a sudden you're pricing me market average plus 10%. So if that is the case, I need to look for alternative suppliers. And this led to a situation where over the last 2 years, we've started working with the supplier side. So we're not a platform anymore that is purely based for the demand side, the shippers, but there's also several of the biggest forwarders and carriers involved. And we talked when we met here about timing of things, and this is one of the areas where I see that we've been very fortunate with the timing of when we released Xeneta, because over the last 4 years as well, digitization and technologies has moved to like a top topic for all executives within all these companies. So from only experiencing closed doors and a lot of resistance,
we're now meeting all the executives, owners of all these big supplier-side companies. So it's been a fantastic journey in that sense as well, because you all of a sudden can sit around the table and talk about what is happening, what does this transparency mean, how can you leverage this transparency rather than looking at it as a threat and so forth. And that's been very inspiring. I'm traveling several times a month now to all these big supplier-side companies, and it's a pleasure dealing with them. Also, typically the top management is very intrigued and very interested in what's going on and to look how they can benefit from it. And I think even the market helped us. The fact that it for years has been trending downwards, and when business runs poorly, you're more open, you're more receptive to think about alternatives. So we kind of nailed that timing perfectly, and that is purely random. So I shouldn't claim any kudos for that, but it's been something that we're incredibly happy about, because I think it's been critical to us to establish our company in the industry.
Because I've been asked by other startups to meet with you and other startups. How were you greeted, or were you not greeted when you entered the industry, or did people understand what you were trying to do? Or
So let me be very clear on this, that I think for the first 2 years, the most usual question I had from suppliers at companies were, have anyone sued you yet? Yes. So it's been a journey of some incredible hostile meetings for the first 2 years. I even have experiences where I've been invited to come and present to the whole management team of one of these top supplier-side companies, where only a few minutes in I've been stopped and they've been pointing to, this is illegal. You can't have this data. It's the data that we have with our customers. Now, going back to what I mentioned about demand always deciding, this is how, to me, this has been played out, because what happens is really that you can question whether it's allowed to upload this data into a platform and effectively benchmark it. But the problem arises that you then got to address that they're also giving this data away to consultancies companies such as McKinsey or BCG when they do studies on their data. You're giving it away to rate management tools. There's a bunch of other places where that data gets stored, in the cloud even, right? So that's one part of it. But in reality, what's the most critical thing here is that if the supplier side goes to the customer side and says, you can't put that data in, it's the same as saying, I'm screwing you over on price and I don't want you to see it. So it's a beautiful balance here. And then we've had numerous of these customers who said, sorry, I can't be in breach of my confidentiality, so I'm going to wait to my next RFQ, my next tender, and then I'm going to put in a clause that says, if you're going to bid for my business, I reserve the right to benchmark this with Xeneta. So the customer decides, right? And that's my point. So the supply side can fight as much as they want when it comes to price transparency. If it's a genuine desire from the buyer side to have that level of transparency, it will move there slowly or fast. Eventually it will.
I'm fascinated.
It was really tough in the beginning, really tough. You got to accept so many no's and so many threats and whatever we've had. But it's all changed. That's what I'm saying about timing. And that's really what makes me go on. Because seeing that change and being part of it and being able to influence it, and now being invited, we get outreach through our websites from top executives and so forth, and then we get in touch with them. We've been knocking on doors for years. All of a sudden it ends up being inbound because their customers refers to it. They pull it up. They show the charts. They show the indices. They show their suppliers how they perform on behalf of them in the market. As a supplier, you need to be on top of that. You got to be proactive and not reactive, right? So, yeah.
But in addition to that, it's also digital. Mm-hmm. I mean, it could have been analog and you could...
Not really, because that's one of the things that, if you look at other companies that are doing benchmarking, you will typically find consultancy companies. There's a limitation to the amounts of data that you cannot operate with if you run this in Excel spreadsheets.
But what I mean is that in addition to being a bit suspicious about what you're doing, on top of that, it's digital. And the industry were not really, it's, as you said, the last 4 or 5 years, maybe they started to.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, I'm not one of those who believe that this industry is like set up to be disrupted. I'm like, this whole buzzword really annoys me. And the analogies of the kayak or Expedia of freight, this is way too simplified. I see this more as a transformation, like we're applying, and with we, I'm not talking about Xeneta, this industry is applying digital solutions anywhere it's applicable. Anywhere they can find something that makes real sense and can help them, their business, they will apply it. Whether it's slightly controversial, as might have been the case with Xeneta in the beginning at least, and still to some degree is, they will apply it. I don't get this. Usually I exemplify. I think an average container shipment from A to C in a supply chain, not the port-to-port element, but A to C. If you're going to move that, it takes coordination on average between 16 stakeholders. Truckers, crane operators, whatever you have on both sides, customs formalities, import, export, and all of that. 16 different stakeholders. If you take a company of ours, whether it's BASF or Nestlé, they have thousands of A to C combinations. So if you're going to move that into the cloud, and we're talking these weird combinations from Santos to Mombasa or whatever as well, right? You need all of these 16 stakeholders to go online, and these changes, they go out and they go in of the supply chain multiple times throughout a year or two or whatever, right? So the complexity is so immense. So when I hear these stories about how it's going to be disrupted, everything's going to be digital, you book everything online, it's not a viable value proposition as per today. And if you take any of these companies shipping tens of or hundreds of thousands of containers, they don't sit online and book through one-on-one container, even though it would take them 3 minutes. It's not a value proposition, because 300,000 boxes multiplied with 3 minutes means that they need to imply a lot of people. It's EDI messages, everything is automated on that, right? So I don't see it move that way, but I think there's tons of areas where there's massive opportunities to make this more efficient, more transparent, and I honestly don't see the massive resistance to that. So that means to me that the industry is open for the right solutions and they embrace them. Not necessarily as quick as we've seen in a lot of other industries, but they do take them in and they do consider it and they do implement it if it makes sense.
You work with the big ship owners. Most ship owners are family owned and they have 10 ships or something like that.
Yeah.
And that is a different story. It's like if you have your family owned lorry company or...
Yeah, I think that's very different. I mean, the liner shipping industry is also getting very condensed. What is the name? It's few players left if you look at the alliances and so forth. And our real experiences is with them. And it wouldn't be my main domain to talk about the smaller ones. And there is a massive difference between the whole break bulk liquid part of shipping and container shipping. It's two very different beasts.
The container industry is also closer to the end customer.
Yes.
Which got another demand.
That's true. To some extent it is. Which is different again from what you see on the air freight side. We're working these days on our air freight product to be released second quarter of next year, where more or less all the cargo or bookings and everything flows through the middlemen, the forwarders, basically owns the market. Whereas in shipping, it's 50-50 ballpark between carriers in direct contact with the end customer, the shipper, and then the rest is funneled through the middlemen. And usually there's a very clear line between big volume shippers going to shipping lines and smaller volume ones going to the middleman, which also makes sense. So these are all different nuances and characteristics of the different modes of transportation to me. It's air freight is different than break bulk, and break bulk is very different from liner shipping. And every once in a while I get into questions about these other
shipping modes, and I try to stay away from it.
I understand. You're an expert in your area.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say expert because I meet people who's been 50 years in the industry who has fantastic breadth and depth in their knowledge about the industry, and especially the historical development, which I'm incredibly respectful of. And we need to find a way to kind of take that kind of mindset into a slightly more modernized way of running things.
But how do you see the future for shipping in general?
That's such a good question. I mean, so McKinsey released a report recently about 50,000 TEU vessels and so forth, looking 50 years into the future, right? And autonomous vessels and all of that. I know that the big wet dream of any carrier or freight forwarder would be to have a big screen that shows all the transportation movements going on in the world, and they're all green, like almost like a financial world where you see the transactions just go on a screen. The challenge I see with that is that in our industry, 80% of it would be red and 20% would be green, right? That's the complexity behind that causes that. So I think the main things we will see over the next at least few years is this transformation, this continuous evolution of the industry, embracing more and more digital solutions. To me, that does not mean it's going to be an Expedia-like world at all. But it will mean that more and more data is applied to make better decisions. I think, to me, it's a lot about that. There's an enormous amount of data generated, too often with human intervention, unfortunately, which makes the data of less good quality. But this is getting cleaned up. And then I think that the main shift in this industry is how to apply all of this data and for every stakeholder to operate more efficiently. I think that's the main thing that I foresee for the next, let's say, 5 years. But then if you talk longer perspectives, then you can start talking about this being a market that is incredibly consolidated, where there's very few supplier-side companies. There's consolidation on the forwarding side as well, which has been going on for years. And I think there's an incredibly interesting almost battle in terms of how the carriers want to branch out into what the forwarders are doing and how the forwarders needs to focus more and more on end-to-end supply chain solutions in order to have a viable value proposition to still be relevant in the market. But I have no qualified opinion on how this is going to play out. I think I'm really focusing on how can we be a part of that, regardless of which stakeholders runs away with the majority. Everyone will need data, and I believe one of the best thing we did with our company is to give birth to it from a data point of view. So for us, it's always been about that data. And I think that is very different from a company building a solution and then getting data as a spin-off from that and then trying to move into that data. So we have mathematicians, we have several people with PhD that only sits and analyzes data and sees what kind of answer they can draw out of that would help our customers make better choices. And with that, I think that we're really uniquely positioned to play with any one of the stakeholders that succeeds. And we see that today. We have not only the core stakeholders, but we have banks and finance institutions, some of them being public reference customers like Goldman Sachs. We have some of the biggest consultancy firms in the world using their tool. We have several tech companies that are building solutions for the supply chain space that uses the data. So to me, it's more of being like a cogwheel within this, supplying the data to the right stakeholders that can use it and leverage from it.
How many people are working now at Xeneta?
We're 60 people now that only works on this, and we're recruiting as quickly as we can, to be honest. It's one of the biggest challenges since day one, right? Finding the right people. And for the first 3 years, we didn't employ any industry people because what you get is people that will challenge you with an industry set of glasses on, which is fine, but not too early. Because in the beginning, we knew that it was so faulty, it was so weak, it had all of these shortcomings. So we needed people who would come in with a different set of glasses on and buy into the simplifications that we knew. We deliberately went with it, even though it was simplified too much. But we knew that it was a starting point, and once we got enough data, we could start addressing some of these issues. And for the last year, we've hired more and more industry people. Now it makes sense. Now we can work with them, with all their objections and views about how this should be built and utilized and so forth. It's a perfect timing. But I guess the 60 people will probably grow to 80, 90 next year, and we'll take it from there. We opened up offices in Hamburg and in Boston, and by next year we want to know when we go Far East.
Best of luck.
Thank you. Thank you, Lena.
The shipping industry is looked upon as the hidden industry. No one really knows about us. How can we become more visible?
I think we are becoming more visible, at least from my point of view. I just spent a couple of days in London before today, meeting venture capital firms and private equity firms. And I'm getting outreach, let's say on average 3 times a week from new investors all over the world. And there's a couple of things that I see. One is that there's more publications and writings about the industry than ever before from outside, especially from tech magazines and stuff like that, which didn't happen 4 years ago at all. So you will see a clear uptake in how much and there's statistics on this, right, about how much the industry is talked about, right? And then with that and this being, I often refer to it as one of the lost dinosaurs. So if you want to look for an investment opportunity in today's world, finding a dinosaur is beautiful. A dinosaur hasn't extracted the potentials of technology yet to its full extent, and it's big enough to be an addressable market that is super interesting. These 2 basic things are so precious. You can look to any other industries and it's so difficult to find something that it's even remotely close. This leads to, alongside more and more new companies being established, it leads to the fact that more and more people are looking to the industry to make an impact, and I think this will continue to develop. Then, on the other hand, it's also about making this industry somewhat more sexy than most people think about it. 50, 60 years back, maybe a bit more, when a vessel arrived at any city, it would come right in the city, like center, and people would gather around to see what was in that vessel. Today we have container yards that are showed far out of the city. No one wants to have it nearby because it looks basically ugly. I think it looks fascinating. We took the whole company a month and a half ago to Hamburg port and did a sightseeing trip. I never seen non-industry people so amazed about the logistics, about the sheer size of things. CMA-CGM had Benjamin Franklin, the vessel was there, so we took a tour on the river so that we got really close up, and people were they really admired this. So it created this whole different view about how interesting and intriguing this industry is, because people don't relate to it. Like I know there's a book even about this sea blindness thing, we just fly over the oceans. So I think that we can all be a part of actually showing people how fascinating this industry is, and that it has a real impact on our lives. I usually refer to this as the main artery of our global economy, but no one relates to it. I don't have a single friend that has any insight into this industry, besides my industry friends, of course.
Yeah, we have a tendency to speak to each other about shipping, but not outside.
Yeah.
And in a way, as you say, that we are attracting more interest. But do we have the self-confidence to stand up and say, we are the sexy industry? That is what we need.
I think we're getting there. There's more and more people realizing that. There's more and more people being more bullish about it. I think also companies are trying to use it now as a part of their recruitment. It's this specific industry. This is global trade. And that's what I got fascinating, going back to when we talked about my beginning of the career. I got fascinated by the level of internationalization. All of a sudden you sit in an Oslo office, but you're dealing with Chinese, Australian, or Brazilian people. It's all connected, right? To me, it's a beautiful industry, and if we can get rid of some of the environmental impact challenges it's inevitably facing, then it really can be a sexy industry.
Yeah, I agree with you. So who would you be interested in listening to in the shipping podcast? Who do you think I should meet the next?
That's a good question. I'd love for you to meet the CEOs of the 3 big shipping lines. So the Sade family and the MSC CEO and also Sørnskau and maybe even the owners of Maersk Group would be interesting. Get their perspective and then pair it with the likes of KN representatives, DHL and Schenker, and then find some shippers so that you can get the 3 core stakeholders within liner shipping and see what you can find of similar things, because it's not that far off each other, whether it's the customers or the suppliers.
I agree. I think all of them have got big press officers standing in the way of speaking to me. That is what I understand.
It's always a way in.
Yeah, I know. Thank you. Thank you for taking the time to speak to me.
Really appreciate it.
It's inspiring to listen to you.
Oh, that's the kind of you to say. Appreciate that.
Best of luck.
Thank you.
You too.
I really enjoyed that interview. I think you could tell. It's so interesting to listen to people who knows what they're talking about and is willing to share that. There are so many values around Patrik and Xeneta that reasons with me and my heart. So I think you get it. I know that they are doing webinars, and you can follow Xeneta on Twitter. Their handle is Xeneta, XENETA_AS. In my little startup world, I am now trying to detach myself from my podcast. No, I'm not going to leave you. I'm just going to try and delegate and outsource part of the production of this so that I can find the time to do more, both for this podcast and for my clients. That is hard. I mean, this is my baby, and now I am trying to not give that away to someone else, but to share it with someone else. That means that I have to start with writing down everything I do and see which part of the process someone else can do for me. It's a lot of hard work, and it's a lot of learning new things. And at the moment, I find myself trying out a lot of new digital tools for sharing files and sharing passwords and streamlining the processes. When was the last time you tried out a new digital tool? I think it's so much fun, but it's hard, and it takes a lot of time. I'm also trying out a new editing tool. So at the moment, I'm in the rabbit hole, and I need to know more things before I can move on. So, with that, I have to go back into my rabbit hole. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please give us a shout out on Twitter. I am at Lena Gothberg in each and every social media channel. And don't forget to follow Xeneta. Go to their website and see what they are doing. There is a really cool video on their website you could watch. So, until the next time, from me to you, over and out. Thank you for listening to the Shipping Podcast. Don't forget to tell everyone that you meet that there is a shipping podcast available and that they should download it and listen to the maritime professionals who are sharing their passion for the shipping industry.